Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of Coloring Outside the Box. Today is June the 17th, 2020, and this is my look at what we can expect as we trek through the sign of Cancer. Of course, this is my monthly podcast in which I look at the ongoing and prevailing energies that we're going to be dealing with as the sun traverses each of the different zodiac signs. So prior to us moving into the sun in Cancer, we have Mercury going retrograde. And I know I promised I wasn't going to talk about astrologies. However, I think this is a terminology that now everyone is familiar with. So tomorrow, Mercury goes retrograde in the sign of Cancer. And the reason why we're talking about it prior to the sun moving into Cancer is because it's kind of a wink from the universe in terms of what kind of energies we're going to be dealing with. So it's a sign that we really need to realize that trying to think our way through feelings is not really going to work. And this is going to be amplified as the sun does move into Cancer. And then we have a new moon, which is a solar eclipse on Sunday, June the 21st. And so for the next few days, you're going to be feeling that energy building. I'm already feeling it, and it's manifesting in lack of sleep. So my apologies if you can see the bags under my eyes, which I feel like are somewhere down around my knees. Anyways, so this is going to be a really intense period with the sun in Cancer and Mercury retrograde in that sign of really looking at, emotionally what supports us. What do we do to emotionally support ourselves? And coming along with this is as a high degree of sensitivity, as well as a desire to try to think our way through things, which may or may not be particularly productive. Because, and this is going to be an ongoing theme throughout this month, because we've just had not that the last month has been without its, energetic ebb and flow. It's felt a little bit lighter and less overwhelming to us. We've been able to start to put some things into perspective and to feel a little less laden down. And now we're heading into a month where there is a lot of energetic activity that is really going to make us feel that somehow we're losing ground again. And it's not so much that, it really is just an opportunity to draw within and see what resources we have within. And I know many of us are going to feel like we don't have any internal resources anymore, and that may very well be the case. However, we also can discover during this period of time that we can dig deeper, that somewhere inside us are resources that we have yet to discover. So it's important that, you take time to be aware that you're going to be feeling like you're being pulled in different directions. First one, thinking that you can think your way through things, and the next minute realizing that no amount of thinking is going to help you process what are essentially issues around how emotionally, I don't want to use the word stable, how emotionally connected am I to myself. The tendency will be to want to really essentially take a vacation, because it feels like we've been living inside ourselves for several months. However, this particular this new moon, this eclipse, is going to remind us once again that we still have some, I hesitate to say the word work, but there's still stuff to do in terms of learning how to appropriately nurture ourselves, our dreams, our what it is we want to plant in our lives, a new emotional beginning, a new emotional pathway. So because this energy at this point on this eclipse is extremely critical. And we're already feeling that, at least I know I am. As I mentioned, lack of sleep has been the number one way of alerting me to that things are like feeling a little inside, like ooh, and it's kind of a vibrational frequency that we're shifting into. We haven't always done a very good job as humans of being accountable for nurturing ourselves in healthier ways. We've always put duties and obligations and other things like that ahead of it, and we're going to be confronting that a little bit more during this particular new moon solar eclipse. And of course, solar eclipses tend to have an effect for, at least an immediate effect, for about 6 months and possibly longer. Now, if it is actually connecting to something important in your birth chart, the effect may be longer. However, rather than terrifying you or scaring you, just understand that everything is a process. Life is a process. There is never a time and a place where everything is done and there's nothing left to do. Let that sink in. That can be a little bit, we're in a space where we really want to get on top of things and bring things back to a structure that we know and we recognize. Hence our optimism as things slowly begin to open up after COVID-19. However, this eclipse reminds us that there's still the process that was begun, because COVID-19 has a physical aspect, but it also has an emotional, spiritual, and intellectual aspect in terms of its impact on our lives. Now, normally I would move on to the full moon, which I will do in just a second, but I did want to make sure you know that this particular trip through Cancer gives us 2 new moons and 1 full moon. So there's a cycle here of opening new doors, opening new pathways, and then we go through the full moon, because we're talking about moonbeams now. The full moon is going to introduce us once again to old patterns and old behaviors and old stuff that still needs resolution. And resolution by recognizing that it may not provide you with the stability that because we tend to think our habits are helpful, and sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. So this is kind of like the full moon in Capricorn on July the 5th is like weeding your garden, making sure that you're tending to everything in a way that's going to support you going forward. So, so that you're not getting stuck in an emotional swamp without any consideration of are you actually just floundering, or are you finding practical ways to begin to build a new structure, emotional structure in your life, not one that just operates on being poked and then you react, because Cancer is a highly responsive sign. Now, with this full moon in an earth sign, it's going to remind us yet again that we do live in the physical world, and that whatever we're processing and dealing with internally, we still have to put it into practice in our lives. So it's one thing to think a lot about nurturing oneself. I know a number of years ago, friends of mine said to me, you need to take some time and do some self-nurturing, taking care of yourself. And my response was, well, that's really nice, but I think that chapter is not in my operator's manual. So I recognize that as I'm talking to you about this, it is important to know that this is foreign territory for some of us, or most of us. And so, of course, our default position is going to be to think about it and think and feel that that will solve the problem. First of all, what you're experiencing isn't a problem, it's a process. So take a moment to think about that. So when we get to the full moon, everything's going to be out in the light, everything that's working, everything that's not working. And that too is an eclipse. So we have two eclipses back to back, as we normally do a solar and a lunar. And so part of the temptation when we get to the full moon is that even though we can see very clearly what's working and what's not working, fear can take us back into a place of, well, you know, the way I did things before wasn't so bad. So let's just stick with what we know. And, you know, when the moon is in Capricorn, it's not particularly comfortable in that space, in that place, because the Capricorn energy has a tendency to want to reduce things to the common denominator and not look too far outside the box. And that's going to be amplified pretty much during this eclipse. So if you feel an internal struggle, which often a full moon will bring you, don't be concerned about that. Just kind of, I want to say ride it out, but that doesn't sound particularly practical or necessarily desirable, because it's like holding on for dear life, you know, thinking that sooner or later this is going to change and then everything will be fine. So, and of course, every year we do have a full moon in Capricorn. It's just that it's only every 9 years or so that it forms an eclipse pattern. So this is the last time we're going to see the full moon in Capricorn as an eclipse for another 8 to 9 years. And so this is an important turning point. And please know, this is about finding resources, emotional resources in particular, you know, nurturing and strengthening our inner self, so that when things shift and change, we know we can trust ourselves. And I know that this has been a theme that I've been talking about a lot since I started my podcast. And that's a lot about what 2020 is about, being able to dig deep and dive into changing the structure of your life without abandoning the things that actually do work for you. Sorry about the adjusting of the chair. So let's move on to our last moonbeam for this trip through Cancer, and that is another new moon at the very tail end of Cancer on July the 20th. So this one is going to feel like, you know, okay, I've started this process. I think I'm doing a good job of weeding some stuff out and looking at my garden and seeing it flourish. Because we're talking about building an internal emotional garden, if you will. Something that is full of light and strength, knowing that you've developed some deeper emotional roots, healthy roots. Now, I just want to back up and use a little bit of this gardening analogy to talk about the full moon. So again, the full moon is going to be about, in Capricorn, about pruning what doesn't work. So if you think about the garden analogy and how it functions, if, you know, the first new moon awakens us to a new emotional path, the full moon then says, okay, you're on a new path. You know, you've got seedlings, they're starting to bloom, they're blossoming. What do you need to prune out of that garden in order for you to continue to bloom? And then we get to the second new moon, and we get a chance to reinforce that, to reinvigorate that, to carry on that process before we get to the sign of Leo. And part of what that's going to do is give you more trust in your own capacity to then take all that internal energy and begin to express it once we enter the sign of Leo in a creative and playful fashion. So I'm going to be really clear that this particular month, doesn't really have a lot of play in it, which of course brings me to Twinkles, which is my look at the things in this month that you can depend on to bring you vitality, to make you feel sorry about the little thing on the side that told me that Norton is working in the background. And maybe that's a sign and a symbol, so you understand that in the background, there might not be a lot in the foreground that makes you, you know, feel yay and life is great, because I'm not sure that's what we're going to be feeling in this next month, so I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm not very good at that anyway. However, the key here is to find the simple things every day that really connect you to your life. So part of the challenge in this month, in order so that you're not so focused on trying what feels like trying to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, is to take the Cancer theme and express it in ways that are simple, like, you know, simplify your life. You know, give yourself tasks that allow you to move the energy, which is also part of the Capricorn thing. Like, you know, the difficulty when we're dealing with Cancer is we can get too internalized, but not necessarily in the most healthy way. You know, in other words, I'm sitting in a swamp and I'm just going to keep swimming in the swamp, even though I know there's a lifeline over there. I don't want it. So in order to promote a healthy use of this energy, find little things, simple things every day. Use the technique that I talked about last week, which was, you know, going into your safe place, feeling your body relax, feeling, you know, your center come into play. Now, what does that mean, your center? Well, it's just that feeling that I'm connected. I may not know exactly all that I am connected to. Maybe in this moment it's just me. Maybe that's what I need to do. Or it can be an opportunity where you do some deep meditation on a daily basis, and you can meditate deeply for 5 minutes. You know, it's not the amount of time that you spend meditating, it's the quality of the energy, allowing yourself to release. I remember once teaching a meditation class, an introduction to meditation, and when we were finished the meditation, one of the participants said, you know, I had a really hard time with this because as soon as you know, we started the meditation, all I could see was the grocery list of things I have to do in my life. So sometimes it can be difficult to quiet the mind, and I'm not talking about I used to think when people talk to me about meditation when I was in my early 20s, I thought, there's no way I'll ever be able to do that because my mind just never shuts off. And then we realize it's not that your mind is empty, it's just it allows you to connect to the 85% of your brain that is devoted to sensing, feeling, and emotion, the creative side of you, the part of you that has where inspiration arrives. Let go of your cognitive mind, and your body knows how to do that if you just trust it. So that's why I say that you don't have to meditate for very long. In fact, one of my favorite things to do at this time of year, my form of meditation, is to go outside and sit outside and commune with the trees late at night. It's a form, and look at the sky. You can meditate by, once again, we're back to the gardening thing. It's a case of just letting go, focusing on one particular thing, and allowing your consciousness to just flow in whatever direction it wants to flow in. And because we're moving through a phase where the sun is in a water sign, that is easier to do than at other times it might be. So Twinkles this month is again about nurturing self in ways that bring you that delight. Like, for instance, can you think of a meal you could have every single day that lights up your world, whatever that happens to be, and not to be too judgmental, because the other thing that we're dealing with is the need for the structure to for things to go back to the way they were, so we can reinforce it, and yet the world keeps on showing us that in new and different ways that may or may not happen. But what we're in a space and a place to do is to carry forward the things in our lives that actually work for us, and release those things that just seem to actually get in the way of us being human. I want you to think about that for a second, because sometimes we try so hard not to be human. So this isn't a time of measuring everything that you do. It's more a time of experimenting with things to see what works. Now, of course, just a little note about relationships. It may feel to you that relationships are a little bit more on track than they have been for the last 6 or 7 weeks. And there may be a lightening in that area. So that, however, it may also feel that nothing has changed, that we've done a lot of talking and not much has changed. And if that's the case, when I say these things, it's more to identify and describe what we're dealing with, as opposed to trying to demarcate what's right and what's wrong. You're the only person that can decide in your life what works for you and what doesn't. And it's better to identify things as effective or not working for you, as opposed to that's right and that's wrong. Life is not always a straight line or a mathematical equation. And the interesting thing about it is mathematicians would tell you that mathematics isn't always as linear as we thought it was when we were in school. But that's a subject that for another time, maybe never another time. Anyway, so now we're going to move on to black holes, my monthly look at where the challenges are going to be for us in this particular time period. So the challenge is going to be that we're going to feel like we're pedaling backwards. There is going to be a sense that, oh, we really have not dealt with the things that we thought we had. And we're going to try to think or plan our way through it, instead of just being present for the feeling. Because, whenever the sun goes through Cancer, that's what it's about. It's about your personal feeling. Because, as you know, I'm a professional astrologer, and everybody has a birth chart. And in that birth chart, everybody has the sign of Cancer somewhere, affecting some aspect of their life. But at its root, Cancer is about getting in touch with your lunar self, your emotional self. Not running away from it, not trying to figure out how to package it or send it away or whatever. And I know that this has been a challenging year, and that's putting it politely. And there have been times and places where we just wished our feelings would take a 2-month vacation somewhere on the other side of the universe, please and thank you. However, this period has been intensely about understanding how best to not just nurture ourselves, but nurture our world. But you cannot, as the I Ching teaches, change the world unless you're prepared to change yourself. And I would amend that to say you cannot nurture the world in a healthy and productive way if you don't know how to nurture yourself. So, however, there's going to be a feeling that, well, why am I wasting my time on stuff like that? There's all these challenging or terrible or scary or awful things happening outside me. I don't have any control over them. I don't have time to figure out how to take care of myself because I need to find work. I need to do this, and I am, again, I'm going to reinforce what I said about the full moon. I'm not suggesting that you live in an emotional swamp and ignore reality. And if you have been, you're going to discover that isn't working. And all that's going to happen is you're going to be even more overcome by any omnipresent fears that you have. And you may feel really, truly overwhelmed. Off and on, it's going to be something of an emotional roller coaster this month. And it's going to feel at times like you cannot escape whatever it is you think you need to escape. And we can spend a lot of time trying to run away from reality. And what are we going to do about that? Again, find a flotation device and hold on for dear life, or don't fight the urge to just, sink into the terribleness of it all. Because the last few months have been really, really difficult in so many ways. And it's been hard for us to take time to be grateful for ourselves. I mean, we've shown a lot of gratitude to the people who've stepped up to the plate and tried to manage as best they can this whole process, either for the, for large groups of people or people in extended care facilities, whatever. They've made huge sacrifices for us. And I think, in a sense, it's important for us to give ourselves some perspective and recognize that we still have much to be grateful in our lives. And that is also one of the things that we need to practice this month is gratitude, because that will only strengthen our capacity to move forward. Even though at times it feels like it may feel like this month that there's no going forward, that we're stuck in a repeat pattern, and both externally and internally. And again, I want you to acknowledge that and not try to fight it. I'm not telling you to suck it up or repress or any of those things. It's going to be an uncomfortable ride at times. And this is the challenge in recognizing that we humans actually know a lot about how to be uncomfortable, persevere, and create new things. Because again, we're back to that first new moon, realizing we're creating not only a new emotional pathway for ourselves, and we're doing it by planting new seeds. And those new seeds may not come to fruition for a while. It's like planting perennials as opposed to planting annuals. We're back to the garden analogy. Anyways, it's funny, I wrote a whole bunch of things down, and of course my brain is trying desperately to remember what I wrote down. And so I want you, before we move on to deep space, I just want you to know that, when I do these forecasts, this is just a glimpse. Your experience may be completely different from what I'm talking about. You may not experience 100% of what I'm saying. Your experience is valid. The purpose of this podcast, when I do it once a month, is to talk about my perception of what's going on. It's not written in stone. It's fluid, and especially when the sun is in a water sign. This is a fluid situation. So one of the things I wanted to talk about as we get into deep space, and now I am actually going to refer to my notes because what I wrote down was important, so pardon me while I take a look over here. So one of the things that's going to happen during this is you're going to be pulled inward. I talked about that. And your thoughts are going to get all muddled, and you're going to get caught between your thoughts and your feelings, trying to make sense of things, not understanding that at this point in time, it's more important, again, that's that notification, it's more important for you to acknowledge what you're experiencing and realize that your feelings can inform your thoughts rather than you trying to use your thoughts to corral all those feelings and make, parse them and pick them apart and put them into little packages that you think will somehow make you feel better. Because when stuff rises up from your solar plexus with this powerful sense that that this has, your body has to experience this, your body has to let go of it, just recognize that's what it is. And just like, sink into your safe place. Put your hand over your heart. That's one of the best ways to recognize, because you're bringing in that energy of, I'm still here, I'm still breathing, I'm still a being, not a thinking, not a doing, I'm being. So one of the things that's really going to surface this month is an opportunity for you to consider all the things that you think about yourself. Yeah, I can already feel that people are going, yeah, why would I want to do that anyways? Because, the subconscious is going to still deeply be at play. One of the things we've been dealing over the last several months is recognizing what is in our subconscious, because it's our subconscious that runs the programs in our lives. It's the things that we believe on a subconscious level. And, this is a perfect time for us to dig a little deeper into that and to realize that we don't have to dig very far, because it's just going to come, roaring up from underneath, and you're going to wonder, where the hell did that come from? But it's an opportunity to really recognize how it is we have continually made choices that we don't understand. Because we suffer from the illusion that it's our conscious mind that runs our life, and that isn't necessarily true. The other thing that you could do, as part of Twinkles, I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, is take some time and use your mental energy to create some affirmations that work for you, using languaging that works for you. I've taught at creating affirmations both visually and verbally, and I really understand, after working with affirmations myself, that the affirmations that you can read in spaces and places, on the internet, in books, wherever, may not be what works for you, because you may have a completely different relationship to the words that are being used in that affirmation than the person who created it. So be clear. If you're going, you can create visual affirmations as well as verbal ones, depending on how, if you happen to be like me and you're not much of an audio learner, visual affirmations can be really powerful for you. So you can make a whole collage, or you can just make a couple of small ones on little cards and put it on your fridge where you can see it every day. And then after a while, your conscious mind isn't always aware that you're seeing it, but the rest of you is. To reinforce those things that you really want to shift and change in your life. So back to the thoughts that you have about yourself. I'm going to suggest an exercise that you might find useful. I know I've used it in classes where I was teaching people a little bit about how to communicate with themselves, because after all, communicating with oneself is of paramount importance. Otherwise, if we're not communicating with ourselves, we are really allowing the patterns that have developed in response to life events to continue to run the show, whether or not that's healthy. I'm fond of saying that a lot of coping strategies that we developed when we were younger, at some point in our lives can turn into blockages because they no longer function well. Because we need to grow out of some of those coping strategies because they no longer work for us. In fact, they actually limit us and get in our way. So you want to know what that exercise is? It's really simple. All you need is a mirror and a bunch of Post-it notes. And so you can make them, I would suggest finding a mirror that's a reasonable size, because you'll be surprised at what surfaces. This is a really excellent exercise to do during this period of time while Mercury is retrograde in the sign of Cancer, is to engage both your mind and your feeling world to work together. Then once you've assembled your materials, I would suggest that you sort of go into your safe place and ask to have things shown to you, or you can put on a piece of music, anything that will help you stop thinking. One of the ways to that can help you, connect to what you identify as things that you think about yourself. Another way to approach this is to take the time and once again assemble the Post-it notes and the mirror and write down all the things you can remember about what other people have said to you about who you are. This too will open the door to you understanding what's running in the background, like the Norton that keeps on popping up on the screen, what's running in the background that are what I call your default positions about yourself. The purpose of this exercise is to help you strengthen the lunar cycles that we're dealing with this month of Cancer, not the month of June or July, but our trek through Cancer. And once you do that, because this exercise is very effective, it allows you to really begin to take apart the things that seem to get in your way, that can often run counter to what's actually happening in your life. And it's an exercise you can do anytime, especially, say you have a belief that, for instance, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. And I identify with that one. In my journalism career, I spent a lot of time telling other people's stories. And it was part of my pathway to getting to a place where I could start talking about my own story. And, one of the things that surfaced when I did this exercise connected to what I just shared with you was what many of my teachers said about me when I was in elementary school, which is, Leslie's a good student. She just talks too much and she daydreams too much. Now, from my perspective, these are aspects of my self that have defined much of what I have done in my life on a career basis, on a life basis. I mean, my birth chart will tell you I came here to be a communicator. And yet, when you can internalize those things that have been said about you, and it doesn't even matter how many times, I'm not talking about it needs to have been said by a lot of people. It has more to do with what has stuck in your subconscious and your self-consciousness about who you are. This leads to the capacity and the ability to see how to better take care of yourself in a healthy way. To recognize that when, in those spaces and places, you were quite vulnerable and open. And you took in things that were true from the other person's perspective, but not true from yours. Which, of course, is at the root of all the self-nurturing we're talking about. Because as you nurture self, you get to know yourself better. And you get to honor and acknowledge who you are and what you're here for and what you're capable of. So on that note, I'm going to pause for a second and thank you for hanging out with me, for sharing my world. And I want to thank you for letting me into your world. It's much appreciated. So take care. I'll see you next Wednesday. And don't know what the topic is because this podcast is always meant to be in the moment and organic to what we're currently experiencing. So much love. Take care. Bye-bye.